All right, my name is Don Seitz, class of 79. I also, as an alumnus, but also as a member of the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, manage a number of alumni initiatives, including TigerTalks in the city. So my pleasure to welcome everyone here. Before we get into the meat of the conversation, a couple of introductory comments by special guests of the evening. Let me first introduce Nick Allard. Nick is the president and dean of Brooklyn Law School and also a member of the class of 74, and was gracious enough, along with his team, to provide this space for us this evening. Nick?
Thank you. Thanks, man. So, is there anybody from Princeton here? You know, I just don't feel right. I think I have to get comfortable. I encourage you all to get a little comfortable. And, you know, just happen to have this available. And 74! Those must be my kids, you know. Tyler, Nate, Hillary, even my son-in-law, Numbnuts, all Princetonians. Love to see so many of you here. This is a match made in heaven. You know, you may have noticed that Princeton doesn't have a law school, but you don't need a law school because you have Brooklyn Law School, and for this type of activity, it's a perfect fit. You know, entrepreneurs are a special breed, and folks that are courageous and start up businesses and enterprises. A lot of times they don't think about law, and they're not particularly cozy with lawyers. But it is, in fact, the case that you can really increase your success, and it's very important to be thinking about legal issues at the takeoff and not just the crash. And so that's one of the things and insights that we've had here, but it takes a very special kind of relationship for that, a very special kind of lawyer. Lawyers have to know how to say, instead of no, they have to learn how to say, here's how. Also, lawyers have to learn how to listen, and they also have to figure out and understand not only the risks, but the different ways that you raise capital and the different approaches to regulatory structures and so on. But so often, the basic forms of organization aren't really adhered to, and that becomes a problem, whether you're successful or not. So often you're undercapitalized, or there's basic fundamental mistakes that are made in how you capitalize in the beginning and get your funds. So often here in Brooklyn, which is the epicenter of the earth and entrepreneurship, we see people using their retirement or mortgaging themselves to the hilt to buy a property to start a business, things like that, and we can help out. Lawyers that are experienced can help out. And then the other thing is, especially because you come from such a free and open digital kind of environment, which is a great thing, but often the intellectual property, the creative property is not protected until the end. And then when it's time, because you're successful, to commercialize, it's gone and somebody else has it. So lawyers can be very, very helpful. And so one of the wonderful things in the match made in heaven, not just with Princeton, but with other small universities like Oxford and you know, other places that aspire to be Princeton, our faculty and our students here have been working hand in glove, and we've been very, very proud to be working with Princeton, especially the Keller Center, and with some of the students, and helping provide sort of the legal expertise and workability. We helped also set up the Rhodes Trust incubator. They call it an accelerator, not an incubator in England, but it's basically the same thing. So we're very active. So I'm welcoming you all here to TigerTalks in Brooklyn version. And we're thrilled to have the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council with us. We're proud of our efforts, as I said, to support startup and the entrepreneurship economy, both locally and globally. And we really are doing our part by training students to provide affordable, if not completely free, but affordable and dynamic legal services to startup businesses. This isn't by accident. You know, this makes sense. It's a fit here. Silicon Valley is so yesterday. You know, Brooklyn is really the center, as I said. When I first started here, there were 19,000, Marty Markowitz was the borough president, and there were 19,000 new businesses, startups created in Brooklyn that year. It wasn't because I arrived here, it was actually going on, believe it or not. But that number has not decreased, and the amount of activity is, as somebody would say, the orange elephant in the room would say, it's huge. And, yeah, but you actually, that's not fake news, that's a real fact that you can look up. The number is large, and it's been conservatively estimated at, I think, $5.3 billion that has been contributed to the local Brooklyn economy by startups and entrepreneurships. And a lot of the entrepreneurships that are most successful, some of them become household names, and you know about them. So, again, we're very glad that you're here tonight. The topic couldn't be more timely. I'm not going to announce yet until you kind of work out all the bugs that we'll be accepting tuition on Bitcoin through blockchain. Not quite yet, but you know, who knows? It might work. It might make a lot of sense. But tonight, we're really happy to be partnering with the Princeton Economic Council. And are there other hosts that should be recognized, other groups? Am I forgetting? And right, exactly, the Bendheim Center. So thank you all for your support and for pulling us together. What an impressive crowd. And we'll be covering at this event Bitcoin, blockchain, ICOs, and much, much more. Dan, thank you so much and thank you all for coming. And I'll see you at Alumni Day this weekend. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And again, our thanks to Brooklyn Law School and the entire team here. Let me, before we get to the panel, let me make one additional introduction of Wendell Collins, who's the Director of Corporate Relations with the Bendheim Center for Finance and is co-sponsoring tonight's event along with PEC. So Wendell, will you come up to share a few words?
Thanks, Don, and welcome everyone. We're very pleased to join the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council, and thank you to the Brooklyn Law School for hosting this exciting Tiger Talk in the city. As some of you may be aware, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, AI, related fintech topics have become an increasing focus of the Bendheim Center over the past few years, as evidenced in our recent fintech conference, our speaker series, and a variety of classroom offerings. Please follow us on Twitter at Princeton BCF for news of upcoming talks this spring, including Michael Novogratz on April 30th. For those of you who have never heard of us, yes, Princeton does have a finance program, but not an MBA school. The Bendheim Center for Finance was established in 1977 through a gift from Robert Bendheim, class of 1937, Lynn Bendheim Thoman, 77, and the Leon Lowenstein Foundation, working with Ben Bernanke, who you may have heard of, then chair of the economics department. As an interdisciplinary center for teaching and research, we draw our faculty from economics, operations research and financial engineering, computer science, engineering, applied math, and more. Our undergraduate certificate in finance program, which includes some of the alumni here tonight, exposes juniors and seniors to coursework in corporate finance, financial econometrics, and financial investments, and connects students with alumni mentors for career development, some of whom are also here tonight. Our Master in Finance program equips grad students from around the world with a quantitative toolkit and exposure to all aspects of finance needed to succeed in the fast-changing worlds of quantitative finance, trading, asset management, investment banking, technology, and entrepreneurial endeavors. One of tonight's panelists, Santiago Barona of the great MFin class of 2014, is a graduate of our program, and a number of our Master in Finance alumni are in the audience as well tonight. For more information, including opportunities to mentor students at Princeton, hire students at Princeton, please reach out to me during the reception or email bcf@princeton.edu, and we'll add you to our events listserv for events both in New York and on campus. And I'll also have business cards on the registration table. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wendell. I'm just going to share a few more words, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask the panelists to take their seats and get wired up so that we can begin the main show. But very briefly, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of PEC, the Entrepreneurship Council, that was formed a couple years or so ago now. And its mission, as you can read on the slide, really is to engage the ecosystem. And that ecosystem is faculty, alumni, students, and the broader community. And that community, by the way, includes Manhattan and Brooklyn. So we're really delighted to showcase different spaces as part of our programming initiatives, because it really is very much part of of that ecosystem. To do so, we at PEC collaborate and work very closely with a wide range of campus colleagues, and you see them, some of them listed here, and then we reach out to the major constituents, the alumni, the faculty, the students, and the community. So it's a very collaborative effort, as represented tonight in the co-sponsorship by Bendheim, and it's really been amazing to help facilitate and drive entrepreneurship and to engage all the folks certainly in this room. And this is a busy chart, so let me just share a couple of thoughts with you on this chart. As the mission statement said, PEC's mission is to focus on programming, on mentoring, and on funding initiatives. And let me just highlight a couple of the many things that are going on here. From a programming standpoint, TigerTalks, which started a year ago in Manhattan, now not only has crossed the East River, but will soon be crossing the continent and going out to the West Coast. So it's really exciting to see the growth and the expansiveness of the program. Similarly, the conference that we held in Boston last fall during the Harvard weekend, tremendously successful. We're taking that to Silicon Valley next spring, and we're actually going to do a mini version of it along with our friends at PEN, the Princeton Entrepreneurs Network, at reunions. So hopefully the message here is things are rapidly growing, the momentum is building, very exciting. On the funding side, two comments. One, of course, the sort of the signature funding mechanism at Princeton is the Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund, the AEF. Their next, this is a fund for graduates 5 years or younger. They may be grad students or undergrads, but 5 years from their year of graduation. The application process is now open for the spring version application process. And Lauren Bender, who is in the audience in the back of the room, is the person to speak with if you are a startup and are seeking up to $100,000 of matching convertible debt. And then the other really exciting funding initiative, last year the Princeton Club of Northern California launched the first chapter of Princeton Alumni Angels, and I'm really excited to share with everyone tonight that New York is deep in the throes of planning a chapter here in the city. Rob Walk and a bunch of people are driving that effort, and the next planning meeting for that group, I believe, is April 18th. Is that right, Rob?
That's a pitch night.
That is pitch night, okay. So if anyone has any questions, Rob, why don't you just raise your hand? Very exciting, the types of things that are going on. And of course, the other signature space that PEC is driving is the opening of the Princeton Innovation Center Biolabs facility on the Forchelli campus. That is now open. First tenants are moving in shortly. Tours are available, so if you have interest there, the executive director of PEC, Anne-Marie Lamont, where's Anne-Marie? She's right there in the center. Please see her, because that's going to be a very fascinating wet lab, dry lab, co-working facility for sciences companies. So let's get on to the main show. 615 alumni registered for this event, which is why we were so happy to be able to move to a much more spacious location than we had originally planned, around a very, very hot topic, but also because we have some phenomenal panelists. Dror Futter is going to moderate the panel, and then left to right, with one right still missing, but on his way, is Santiago, Katya, and Catherine, and Nader will be here. Oh, I'm sorry, Florence. My apologies.
Close.
They will take you through the exciting aspects of what's happening in the blockchain and crypto and ICO world. So with that, let me turn it over to Dror.
Thank you. Well, first of all, welcome everyone, and it's really nice to feel the energy in the room on a really dreary night. So thank you guys all for coming out. My name is Dror Futter. I'm a member of the great class of '86, and thrilled to be here. I am a partner at the Rimon Law firm. My background is really in venture and technology, but over the last couple of years, my practice has increasingly started focusing on a host of blockchain-related issues. It's kind of ironic, if you will, that we're holding this event in a law school. I was meeting with the SEC, part of a group that met with the SEC a few weeks ago, and the observation that I made to them is that most people don't recognize the greatest contribution of blockchain, which is making more securities lawyers than all the law firms in the United States have graduated in their history. Everybody has become, in the ICO craze, a securities lawyer, and it's been interesting to play out. Thankfully, this panel will not really focus on legal issues, but I've gone to enough events that I've heard cringeworthy stuff on other panels. I won't interrupt our panelists, but if you do hear me with a hacking cough, it's not because I'm not feeling well. One other thing I'd like to do before I key up the panel, a few weeks ago we set up a discussion group on TigerNet called, appropriately enough, Blockchain Tigers. We really want to try to make it a robust forum for discussion about all issues blockchain. And so regardless of your level of involvement, your level of knowledge, please join us, and hopefully we can educate each other along the way. In terms of the panel, we really wanted to structure it with a couple of elements. We're going to try to give you an introduction, what I would call Blockchain 101. We have a very wide range of levels of expertise in the room, and we wanted to kind of level set. We'll then kind of start talking about blockchain use cases. And clearly, the two that are getting all the press today are cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ether, as well as ICOs, and that's become a real craze, $4 billion plus raised in 2017. So we're going to talk about those use cases, but what's really nice is that there's a whole other set of blockchain use cases in areas as diverse as blood diamonds, healthcare, fintech, where blockchain really shines and delivers really amazing solutions. And we're going to try to give you a little bit of a flavor of things that are going on in the blockchain ecosystem that don't get the attention of ICOs and crypto yet, but will. So with that, I think we'll ask Santiago to start and walk us through a little bit of Blockchain 101.
Thanks, Dror. It's fantastic to be here. I see a very broad range of members of the Princeton community. Some students came up from campus, including my intern at Bloomberg last summer. So thanks everyone for coming. I see also the person who wrote my recommendation letter to Princeton. So it's fantastic to be here. It's a very diverse crowd, so let me just give a brief introduction to the topic so everybody's at the same speed. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about, first, what a currency is, second, what Bitcoin is, and briefly I'll just touch on alternative coins. So, what exactly is a currency? I think nobody used to question this a few years ago, but nowadays we're all wondering, well, does Bitcoin qualify as a currency? And if so, what else qualifies as a currency? Money can take many forms. Hundreds of years ago, in a remote Pacific island in Micronesia, this is what money looked like. Giant limestone boulders. That's because the inhabitants of the island of Yap, after navigating for days, managed to find an island hundreds of miles away from Yap. And on this island, they found these huge limestone boulders, beautiful boulders that they couldn't have access to on their island. So in a typical Polynesian way, they decided to load them up on canoes and take them all the way back to their island. They were so scarce and so beautiful that they instantly acquired value. And quickly, the inhabitants of Yap adapted to using them as currency. So how could this be currency, you might ask? Well, there's a fixed supply. There were only as many boulders as people could bring on canoes from hundreds of miles away. It required a lot of effort to create and transport. Each of these boulders was not easy to make. It was extremely hard to forge, especially on Yap without the raw materials. And it started providing status to the holders of these boulders because society agreed that having one of these boulders gave you status. So fast forward to today, according to economists, what are the 3 conditions that a currency must satisfy? First is a store of value. So a currency, if I have $1 today, I expect it to hold value 10 years from now, despite what this administration may be doing. It should also be a unit of account. So I should be able to price the goods and services that I want in this unit. So if I go to my local store, I can say, hey, I'd like to buy this phone for $500, and that's my unit. And it should also be a medium of exchange. So I should be able to go up to any Starbucks and be able to buy a good that I want, coffee, with this unit. So obviously fiat currency, at least stable developed market currencies, satisfy all these requirements. The dollar in 10 years should be worth roughly what $1 today is worth. I think of everything in terms of how much they're worth in dollars, and it facilitates exchange very easily. However, this isn't the only game in town. There's also an exciting innovation called cryptocurrency that also satisfies these 3 criteria. So they're a store of value. In fact, I wish I had stored any value in Bitcoin a few years ago. I'd be a lot happier. I might be living on Yap today. They're a unit of account. Some of you might be questioning this, but there are a few goods out there that are being priced in Bitcoin or in other currencies. In fact, the main good that's priced in Bitcoin these days is alternative cryptocurrencies. And it's also a medium of exchange. I have family living in other countries, and I'll never forget the first day when I received a payment from my brother living in a different country so I could send him some stuff from Amazon. It was just magical. It's like Venmo, but global. So what is this Bitcoin thing that I'm talking about? So back in the depths of the global financial crisis, when the Western financial system was on its knees, on an obscure cryptography forum, a pseudonymous author published something that was basically alien technology brought from the future. It was extremely well timed, right in the middle of the financial crisis. It was pseudonymous. Nobody knew who this Satoshi Nakamoto guy was. In fact, nobody really still does. It was extremely polished, really good paper, so people suspect it came from an academic or someone with an academic background. And unlike a lot of these papers, it actually came with beautifully written code. So all of a sudden, there was this system that people discovered that could allow one user to transfer value to another user the same way the internet revolutionized the transfer of information. So this was almost magical. People have been trying to crack this problem for decades. And the magic behind Bitcoin is what's called the blockchain. And you're going to hear a lot about blockchain today, and you probably hear a lot about it in the news. So let me try to explain it to you in a simple way. Basically, the way a blockchain works is, let's say I want to send $100 to Dror. And Dror happens to be in Argentina, where he recently came back from. So what I do is I just pull out my phone and type in Dror's address and just say send, and I send him $100, or in this case, 0.000 something Bitcoin. That transaction gets hashed. Now, for all of those people here with computer science background, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For all of those people without a computer science background, all it means is I basically take the transaction and generate a string of letters and numbers that's almost certainly unique. So I can hash this transaction, and I get this long string of letters and numbers. Similarly, somebody else, somewhere else in the globe, does another transaction, which we can also hash. Now, we can also take these two hashes, the unique string from my transaction and the unique string from somebody else's transaction, and hash those two together. We get another hash. Similarly, other transactions get hashed, and their hashes get hashed, and those hashes then all get hashed. All of those transactions get put into a block. That's the block in blockchain. All it is just a list of transactions that are cryptographically secure. They're immutable because it's very hard to invert a hash function. And the chain in blockchain comes from the fact that these blocks are chained together. Every 10 minutes or so, a block consisting of a whole set of transactions gets hashed and put onto the blockchain. There's all these other details about how that works, but that's basically the overview of how a blockchain works. For those of you looking for an analogy, the one I like best is a blockchain is just one huge Excel spreadsheet where a certain number of rows gets password protected every 10 minutes, and there's no way to remove the password protection from those rows. That's basically what a blockchain is. So the Bitcoin blockchain is just the equivalent of a huge Excel spreadsheet spanning back to 2009 with a lot of protected rows, each row specifying a transaction. Now, the Bitcoin protocol is peer-to-peer in that there's no central party that determines how this Excel sheet looks. There's a lot of peers on the network, and they all communicate with each other, trying to find out exactly what each node is up to. It's secured by cryptography. It uses cryptography in some really interesting, really innovative ways. And the magic of it is that it actually removes the need for a centralized authority. All previous attempts at coming up with some sort of digital cash had one major flaw, which is that they still relied on trusted counterparties. So you could have, for example, JP Morgan emit its own electronic cash, but that, of course, fundamentally required JP Morgan to still exist and to be acting in good faith. All previous attempts required some central counterparty like this, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this paper proposes a method to do without the central counterparty. And that's the magic of blockchain, decentralization. Anyone can join the Bitcoin network or any other blockchain network. When I send a transaction out, everybody learns about it. It can be confirmed by any miner. Anyone can become a miner. There's no need for a central authority whatsoever. Fans of blockchain, in fact, and I know we have a few today here with us, think, hey, if we can decentralize currency, why can't we decentralize everything else? So there's a lot of applications for blockchain. That's what the furor is about. However, for our purposes, there's really only three things that matter about Bitcoin. Number one is that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. This is mathematically guaranteed. This is a fixed supply. This is like the boulders of Yap. You can't create a new boulder on an island without limestone. Similarly, you can't create Bitcoins. There will never be more than 21 million of them. Second is that nobody controls it. Not the Fed, not the current administration, not the UN, not Bill Gates, nobody. It's completely decentralized. And third, it allows anyone, anywhere, to send value to anybody else almost instantaneously and almost for free. So the caveats there is settlement takes about an hour and transaction fees are non-zero, although these days they're approaching zero again. So Bitcoin, amazing technology. What do we do when amazing technology comes out? We copy it. Especially because Bitcoin came with code, open source code that anybody could copy. So it's very easy to just grab this Bitcoin source code and alter it. You might want to change the hashing algorithm to something that you like. You might want to change the inflation rate. Maybe you want there to be more coins or for coins to be mined more quickly. You might want coins to be mined more quickly through different block timing. You might want to add new features, for example, anonymity, privacy, smart contracts. You might want to look at specific use cases. So, for example, the Internet of Things, prediction markets, all sorts of specific use cases. Storage, you name it. So there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of alternative coins out there, each of which solves a problem differently. It has a sort of a slightly tweaked Excel spreadsheet, where some have more intense passwords, some others are faster, you name it. You can go on CoinMarketCap right now. There's going to be hundreds of coins at your disposal. In fact, one of our panelists is launching a different coin. So if he shows up, he might be able to explain it to us. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or to ask on this panel. So that's it. That's blockchain in a nutshell for you.
So, Santiago, thank you so much for doing this. It was amazing and really bordering on awesome when you consider the fact that we brought you in as a late substitute this morning for a panelist who fell ill. So let's have a big round of applause for Santiago. I actually, first of all, for those people in the back, if you're the kind of person who never wanted to sit in front of the classroom, I don't want to disrupt you. But if you do want a seat, we have a bunch of open seats up front. So if anybody wants to come up, this is a good time. I wanted to do something before that I forgot to do just to get a sense of the room. So I just want to do a survey. How many people here have bought Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency? Okay. Is there anybody from the IRS in the room?
There's somebody back there.
Okay. Actually, I read an article. This is unfortunately not hard to believe, but one of the online filing services did a survey of 250,000 accounts for their 2017 returns, and it was 0.0004% reported any Bitcoin income. So outside of just buying Bitcoin, how many people here would consider themselves actively involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem? Still. Okay, these guys know their stuff. So we'll try to meet expectations. Nader, we're going to turn to you first and ask you to tell us a little bit about what you're up to and a little bit more about the cryptocurrency space.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Nader. I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here now. And I'm working on with my team, we're working on a new cryptocurrency called Basecoin. And what it effectively is a cryptocurrency just like Bitcoin, but without the volatility. And so at a high level, we think about Bitcoin and other Bitcoin itself actually, with cryptocurrency, what we think it is really is a technical innovation. In particular, it gave society the ability to run a database without an owner. And what I mean by that is, you have a database with a fixed set of rules for how it changes, and nobody can come in and violate those rules or modify rows in a way that doesn't stick to them, as you were saying. And that might seem like a small leap for a small step forward for technology, but it turned out to be really, really useful for money. And I think that we don't really see it as much here in the US and possibly in the EU or in the developed world. But when you look at developing nations, if you look at developing countries, whenever they try to run a money database, the biggest problem is actually the owner, where he'll modify a row to maybe give himself billions or trillions of dollars, or modify the rows of other people, set them to zero, give their money to him. That's asset seizure. And so getting rid of that owner is really a pretty big leap forward for money. and for money databases, really. And so, it's actually starting now to move into kind of equity databases, property databases. Very interesting now. You're seeing ICOs. They're really just property databases. And so, back to what we're actually doing is, we think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is this technical innovation of running a database without an owner. But we think that the rules for the Bitcoin database could be changed a bit to make it more attractive as a currency. In particular, we think that you can have an ownerless database with slightly more sophisticated rules that are effectively a monetary policy on the blockchain that make the currency stable against a reference instrument, so stable against the dollar. And so what Basecoin is it's basically Bitcoin, but with two changes. The first change is we get an exchange rate from the outside world onto the blockchain for the currency. So it could be Basecoin to dollar. It could even be Basecoin to some other asset, Basecoin to banana, if you want. That's like not dependent on a discretion or on like a centralized Fed or something like that. But you put an exchange rate on the blockchain. That's the first difference between Bitcoin and Basecoin. And then the other difference is that the supply of Basecoin grows and shrinks to keep the price pegged to the reference instrument. So one Basecoin, $1, or one Basecoin, one banana. And it's pretty simple. Ownerless database just like Bitcoin, but with different rules to give you stability. And that's what it is.
Okay, great, thank you. And Katya, you've been doing some work in the ICO space. So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So every single financial statement, investment statement, starts with something that says past performance is not indicative of future performance. And because this is the case, I kind of actually want to talk about past performance because this is the wrong thing to do, right? So ICOs. In Bitcoin's case, I think when we look at the fiat currency, it's a very good comparison. But what do we compare the ICO market to? So I spent 10 years in finance, like traditional, normal Wall Street, quant researcher, I guess fundamental researcher. And what can you really compare? What's the closest comparison to ICO? And I would say it's probably the IPO market. So you start with a company, which is a real business, which is a real asset, and you go through this process where you have the middleman, the bank usually, or a number of banks, and you have a bunch of investors, some of them institutional, some of them retail, but you have this very complex due diligence process. And one of the reasons why you would have a due diligence process actually to protect retail investors, which is translation for naive investors, which is none of you in this room are actually naive investors, hopefully. But second reason is really you're trying to distribute assets. You're trying to put those assets to the best possible use. So you're really trying to understand. You're really trying to value the asset. And this is kind of the background of all the market economy. We're trying to divide the limited resources that we have to the best possible uses. And in the ICO world, this whole concept gets kind of screwed up a little bit, in my opinion. But what you want to determine ultimately every time you analyze an ICO is basically the same things you would do with any other company. Is this a liable company? Is this a business that has proper traction? Is this a business that has proper clients, proper revenues? Is there really a use? Is it crypto for crypto, or is there use for the actual project? So that's number one thing. The second thing that you will want to predict when you're analyzing any sort of company is the fundamentals, the sales, whatever you'll see in your typical financial statements. And I'm sure there are plenty of finance people here, and plenty of people took economics classes. But it's really, can you summarize the last quarter of the company in any sort of financial statement? And usually the market data and the fundamental data gives you a very good combined picture of this how the two make sense. So I'm working right now in a company where we construct an alternative data. So this is the data that combines both. So those are more like predictive metrics, but in the end they tend to, they'll predict the sales at the end of the quarter, but you'll see the progression every day. They'll predict the traction of the company on daily basis, but hopefully it will show up in the revenue number or number of customers at the end of the quarter or the year, whatever it is. So we're trying to do the same thing for ICOs right now. And for me personally, it kind of started as a pet project, just something I was doing on the side. I was asked this question by journalists. And I'm like, okay, how do we think about it? If I apply my normal finance person logic to the same, to ICO market, how would I think about it? And the couple of things that came out that were extremely, extremely surprising. And the first one of them was, well, how do you define if the company is going through an ICO? And I say companies here, but really we're talking about programs or protocols or specific projects that are being developed. How do you know if it's actually happening? The first thing that you'll be looking at is it's all open source, or 99.9% of it is open source. You'll actually want to see, is there actually any code behind it, or is it just a white paper? Because I can publish a white paper on this speech right now, and I hope some of you guys will give me money, but I also hope that most of you are smart not to just give me money because I wrote something. So you really want to see if there is any code that has been written for this project to prove the case. And so we scraped the web for this kind of data usually. So it's all public data. Any of you can go there and actually look at it. But we scrape it, we use machine learning to scrape it just because it's much more efficient this way. And the shocking thing that you actually find when you go on GitHub, which for computer scientists in the room, it's kind of like the main place where you post any code that's open source. You'll find that out of the almost 40 top ICOs of 2017, less than half of them had repositories in GitHub. So they're either doing it somewhere else, somewhere where none of us have heard about, or they actually have not written any code. And we're talking, in the fourth quarter of 2017, there was probably over $1 billion raised in ICOs. So we're talking about $250 million of money that is actually really backed by something. Another 250 that's, there may be, a couple of lines of code, but we're not really talking about the real thing. And then the other 50%, it's not even there. So they haven't even actually started working on those projects. So that's number one thing that I think to me it was a little bit shocking. I was expecting much more substance behind it. The second thing that I looked at, and there was not as much surprise there, is how much activity, social media activity, is there behind each company, and they're all amazing at marketing. They have more followers than a lot of the bigger companies, who are trying to do the same thing. I think the average that we came up with was something like 40,000 followers for the top 40 companies in the ICO space. So it's it's a decent amount following. But because we're looking at this data over time, what you see is actually, you see spikes kind of going into the ICO, through the ICO, and then the moment it's done, the moment actually they raised the money that they wanted, it kind of like starts, trembling down, and you really start wondering, is the end of the project just raising the money itself? For a lot of IPOs, this is the case. And then the managements have to go in and prove, that there is reason for the company to trade up. But in ICOs, there is actually no real pressure. There is no board. There are advisors, but everything is very, very fluid, and it's much harder to, do due diligence on those people as well. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that I really wanted to bring up, so when we're looking at alternative data on any company, public, private, anybody from, Apples and IBMs and, to the smallest startup, the one thing that you really care about is to see how many people are actually employed at that company and, how it's volatile over time. And the second thing would probably be how many people are they hiring? Are they aggressively growing? Are they aggressively cutting down? And it usually tells you different stories. So when we try to pull up this data on the top 40 ICOs, so I'm literally talking about probably close to $200 million worth of ICO money that was raised in 2017. What you find out is that on average, only about a quarter of the companies actually had LinkedIn profiles as a company, on company level. So majority of them didn't report. I think the average number of employees was about 25 people, which is, again, not very impressive. And I could not get any sort of data on, are these companies growing? Are they actually trying to hire people? So to me, looking back, I'm like, this is very interesting data. And I do believe in blockchain in a very specific way. I think it's a very new way to allocate limited resources, across the world, across asset classes, across economies. But it's also something that needs to mature a little bit, because we've seen this process with IPOs. They went through, I would say over a century, your lawyer can correct me, but they went through over a century of, legal,
I'm not that old.
Yes. But there are laws there for a purpose. You know, we're trying to protect everybody, and we're trying to make that market efficient, because efficient market ultimately allocates the limited resources to the best possible uses. So when you look at ICOs, you think that this is the place where you'll find the ultimate efficiency. And the problem right now is that too few institutional investors are looking. Institutional investors who are looking, you know, they're kind of doing that emoji where there's a monkey with the hands over the face, where I kind of really want to participate. I'm going to do just because it's hot, but I'm not really going to look. I'm not going to use any of the normal tools that I'll be using when I analyze any other company. And I'm just going to, you know, hope for the kind of binary outcome. Hopefully I'm the right one. But so that was the shocking finding for me. But you know, hopefully, you know, companies like mine, hopefully a lot of our clients and hopefully a lot of investors across the ICO market are going to refer back to the tools that we have really been using, you know, for decades, some of them for centuries, fundamental economics, you know, fundamental finance theory, and then, you know, you merge it with technology that we have today for very kind of wide applications, and you merge it together and you come out with an answer that gives you at least some sort of, you know, maybe it's not going to be price to commit ratio, which is something that I just came up with. It's not going to be asked in the next CFA exam or anything, but, you know, commit is kind of the amount of code that you wrote for a specific project. So there won't be price to commit ratio, but there'll be some sort of metrics where people look at them and they look over time, and it actually either makes sense or it doesn't make sense. You can really differentiate the, you know, unicorn from the rest of the market, which for now looks to be mostly fake.
I got to tell you, after one of my presentations on the blockchain, I was approached to both represent and invest in a company that was launching a token to develop flying taxis in the Persian Gulf. And after hearing this, I'm having second thoughts. Okay, Florence is basically going to cover the rest of the blockchain space. So if it has the word crypto or blockchain in it, she's going to talk about it.
That's right, and thank you so much. So I'm a mechanical and aerospace engineer, so I can do this planet and the galaxy, so hang on tight. And so what I focus on is the leverage of blockchain to improve trust, identity, and security in interactions and sharing of data. I'm on the editorial board for Blockchain in Healthcare Today, and we're attracting manuscripts on an ongoing basis, in case you have one, about how to leverage blockchain for these capabilities in the healthcare industry. That can include for the pharmaceutical supply chain. There are a lot of counterfeit drugs that get into the pharmaceutical supply chain. A gentleman at an event I spoke at last week that Dror joined as well from Africa said, can you help us with that in Africa? And that there's a lot of issues with that there. So there's an opportunity to leverage that. It could be as we go toward precision medicine and precision oncology. I work with a group called Cancer Informatics for Cancer Centers, and also supercomputing applications for cancer research. And we're looking at increasing data sharing, especially since the Cancer Moonshot event that Joe Biden hosted a couple of years ago at Howard University in DC, and now the ongoing Beau Biden, named after his son, Blue Ribbon Council, for the Cancer Moonshot. And one of the big issues is data sharing. You know, Joe Biden got up in front of us all at Howard University and said, I know you doctors, you don't like to share your data, do you? Well, if we're going to accelerate a cure for cancer, you need to. And so there's a cultural move to increase data sharing, but you need to do it securely. You need to have trust of the human that's trying to get to the data. You also need trust between devices, you know, the Internet of Biomedical Things. When the glucose meter tells the infusion pump, oh, this is the glucose level, you want someone like in a scrum, that's what I kind of call a blockchain, it's like a digital scrum, everyone hanging on to each other. Wait a second, where'd you get that data, right? And so that's what we're looking at, is how we can leverage blockchain to improve these elements. And actually, Emily Nichols, who's in the audience, she and I actually wrote a chapter in an Elsevier book a couple of years ago, in the Handbook of Statistics. I was terrible at statistics at Princeton, but that's another story. But it's on a cognitive computing theory and applications, because I worked on the Watson strategy at IBM and the IoT strategy, and we were looking at the global citizen. You know, and as you're traveling around the planet and you contract something, I got very sick in China. They were not able to diagnose it or treat it well here. when anaphylactic ended up in the hospital. You remember these events if you lived through it. You know, how do we actually get the right data? How do we know what's going on with my genomics, with the plant and animal genomics of where I grew up versus where I ate something versus this versus that? So there's a lot of opportunity to increase data sharing toward precision medicine and precision oncology, but it has to be done safely. So we created this framework working with IEEE. Who's ever heard of IEEE? Any geeks in the room? Yay! Okay, so the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, 423,000 geeks from around the planet, God bless them. And IEEE, we worked with them and with the National Science Foundation to have a workshop at George Washington University 2 years ago on end-to-end trust and security for the Internet of Things. And you're talking about the data going between things and things trying to connect to things. And out of that, we came out with this framework called TIPS for IoT: trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. All the things that you should be thinking about before you click on something or before you use a device, or if your grandmother has one of those implantable pacemakers that was recalled by the FDA on August 29th. Who saw that announcement? Okay. So you should know about this. So on August 29th, there was an announcement by the US FDA that there, I think it might be 469,000, in that range, implantable pacemakers. They were originally St. Jude, I think they're Abbott Labs now, that require a firmware update because they're all hackable. Oh my goodness, that's a problem. So, so it is a problem. So, you know, I try to tell this in a consumable way. I say, I'm Italian, right? There are a few Italians. We were, DC and I were talking about this before. So let's say I tell, okay, Grandma, we need to get you a firmware update for your pacemaker. So my grandmother would say, firmware. That's like al dente? Close. Not too hard, not too soft, firm. You got it, Grandma. So first we'll go to the doctor, then we'll go get some pasta. But you know, we have to think about this, and how can that be hacked? And what if, with near-field communications, NFC, someone goes by and actually can hack that device? There are insulin pump hacks. I don't know if you've seen some of them on the news, but you know, they're, not to name any names, but Medtronic and J&J were two that were in there, and they've actually been on the, you know, they've been, you know, on newsreels where people can hack these devices, and they say, well, you have to get within 25 feet. I'm like, how many people are within 25 feet of me right now? Are you kidding me? That's not a problem. So what we have to do is really secure the data sharing. So the blockchain can actually help with some of these elements. So healthcare is a big issue. We just had an IEEE, now that I can say it that way, conference last week in Orlando on blockchain for clinical trials. Very interesting. And there, I don't call it distributed ledger technology because I think there's some centralized pieces, and I think they're going to be public and private. I think there's going to be hybrid blockchains. So I think there could be a private blockchain between, you know, the pharmas that want to do the clinical trials, maybe with the doctors. But then we talked about having a public blockchain where you can actually attract more patients for clinical trials. As you might be aware, there aren't enough patients in these clinical trials, so we can try this stuff out and try to cure some of the challenges that we have in the medical world. So there are many opportunities to leverage this. The transportation industry, IBM just announced a cooperation with Maersk on trying to improve transportation and shipping. If you think of all the paper and all the delays and all the things, you know, this got stuck in the Suez Canal, they were waiting for the paperwork. Oh my gosh. Time, money, all sorts of things you can do to actually enhance things. And then there are some really interesting things like actually making sure we have identities of all humans to reduce human trafficking. That touches you right in your heart, right? Another issue that came up with my friends from Africa. So there are so many opportunities to leverage blockchain for good, and that's what we're working on. One of the really cool, I'm going to get to present at another IEEE conference for WAMI. Isn't that a cool acronym? WAMI, which is Wearables and Medical Interoperability. So what they're trying to do, which is very interesting, is that the IEEE Standards Association, the people that made 802.11, any geeks know what that is, that's how we communicate over networks. So what they want to do is see if we can start creating some standards that will give people comfort to start actually deploying some of these technologies in the devices and in the network. So there's so much that we can do with blockchain, and I encourage you all to think about it because there are new applications that many people haven't even thought of.
Thank you. Just another example, Walmart is doing Walmart has been doing a pilot project to track mangoes through their supply chain. And in congressional testimony, they indicated that their ability to do food recalls when there are issues with food safety has dropped from 7 days to under 10 seconds using blockchain technology. So the impact really in these non-ICO, non-crypto use cases can really be very profound. We are going to start questions. I understand we have people walking around with microphones, or will be shortly. And if you have a specific person that you want to direct it to, please, please let us know who it is. Otherwise, we'll field it as best we can. And please let us know your name and class.
I had a question for Santiago. I would like to understand better this hashing and how it seems to be some type of encryption, but then how do you recover the data when it gets to the person? You didn't mention that.
Sure. So hashing is basically a function that's relatively easy to apply one way, but very difficult to invert. So if you give me something, I can hash it very easily and give you back a string of letters and numbers. But if you give me a string of letters and numbers, it's extremely hard for me to figure out what you gave me originally, which means that, for example, if I am sending you some value through a cryptocurrency, I can say, hey, this is me, and I can prove it using this hash. You can say, hey, I can see that this is coming from Santiago because it has the right hash. But it's very difficult for a hacker to pretend to be me, because the hacker wouldn't have the key needed for that special function.
So the receiver has a key to this, like elliptic curve?
For the receiver to get the
Can you
data.
tell us about private and public?
Sure.
So there's many different hash functions. It is the way Bitcoin works. So the addresses are actually the public and private keys. And you can use the hashes of transactions using your private key to determine that it's actually legit. So it is, and it is elliptic curve cryptography currently, at least. Do you want to take people?
I guess this is for Santiago as well. We'll try to spread it out wider as we go.
We'll just
I
leave.
saw an article about a month ago that said Bitcoin is doing about 4 transactions a second, where Visa does 1,000, and the energy drain is off the charts depending on your definition or estimate. Is that a constraint? Is that, it seems like it's a feature, not a bug. Does that make this not scalable?
So you bring up 2 really good points, which is the scalability of a system like that and also the energy consumption. In terms of scalability, there's already solutions to that. Just these days, something called the Lightning Network is being deployed, which will allow people to transact off the blockchain, which gets around this. There's a max of about 7 transactions per second on the current Bitcoin blockchain. In terms of energy consumption, a lot of alternative coins have a different mechanism to certify that transactions are valid. So Bitcoin uses one, which is called proof of work class. And proof of work generally is proof of energy that you input. Other cryptocurrencies use what's called proof of stake, where you basically stake a certain amount of money, and if you act in bad faith, you lose that money. That's an alternative. There's also proposals to actually use all this energy consumption in ways that benefit humanity a lot more. So for example, using all this computational power to, whether it's search for extraterrestrials or to fold proteins or whatever it is, there's ways to channel all that energy usage to better uses.
Are you guys going to, I would take up front.
Question for Nader. If the whole purpose of Bitcoin is to decentralize currency, then why tie to an existing currency? What are the benefits that you retain by, obviously less volatility, but what are the benefits of Bitcoin that you retain while being tied to, say, a US dollar or a banana?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe to clarify, if you're tied to a banana, there's no reliance on any kind of centralized authority, right? Or is that clear, I guess?
Yeah. Well,
Okay, I'm just saying. So that's
Maybe
already
Chiquita.
that's a benefit. I guess are you saying what benefits are retained? Yeah. I mean, the whole thing that makes Bitcoin really good is, again, like I said, there's a database with rules, and there's no owner who can kind of go above those rules, right? And if you look at a lot of developing countries, their currencies, in a lot of developing countries around the world, especially in Latin America and Africa, the most stable currency they have access to is like devaluing at a rate of 10% or more a year. The reason for that is because there's an owner who's doing a monetary policy that's unfavorable to the population, right? And the only reason that Basecoin can be stable and not have that problem is because there's no owner on the database. The rules are fixed, and that's exactly what Bitcoin's innovation was. The difference between Bitcoin and Basecoin really is the rules that we choose, right? And we happen to choose rules that, well, so just to make it clear, right? Bitcoin is a fixed supply currency. In the long run, it's basically 21 million, and that's it. But if you look at any currency that's actually widely used, USD, Euro, pick any one, it's not fixed supply. It's actually an elastic supply. And there's a very, very good reason for that, which is that if a currency is fixed supply, it can't respond to fluctuations in demand without fluctuations in the value of the unit. And so you get volatility. And a lot of people think that Bitcoin volatility is eventually going to go down, and that's not true. Well, sorry. It's definitely going to go down, but it's not going to go to zero. The reason being that as long as it's fixed supply, fluctuations in demand will cause fluctuations in the value. A good example is gold, which has been around for thousands of years and still has about 15% annual volatility. And so, yeah, so Bitcoin's like 15% per day, but 15% per year is actually still too high. Yeah, I guess one more difference, right? Like the reason why this matters, right? Because you asked me about the difference between Bitcoin and Basecoin. The reason why the stability matters is, if you go to do a transaction at a store where you want to buy something, you and the shopkeeper can agree on a price and then pay that price and get out. And that probably works with like 15% annual volatility. But what doesn't work is whenever time is involved in a transaction. For example, a loan or a salary. Time exacerbates the negative effects of volatility. And so just as an example, if you want to do a salary, so you want to pay 1 Bitcoin per month, what happens over time, even if Bitcoin only had 15% annual volatility, is the price would drift either against the employer or against the employee over time. And so if the price goes up, employer says, I'm paying you too much. Price goes down, the employee's going hungry. And so any two-party contract that's not instant is going to have a problem if the underlying currency is fixed supply. So that's like really the core difference. And by the way, most of the most fundamental contracts in our economy are time-based. And so that's the key difference, is getting rid of that volatility we think makes it actually useful as a currency. But in terms of the underlying technology, it's really, you can think of it as Bitcoin with different rules. I don't know if that answers what you were looking for, but anyway.
You pick.
I thank you, everyone. It's working, yes. So I have a question, probably for Florence, but potentially for Santiago. It strikes me always that as we talk about blockchains and Bitcoin, you have a very informed audience, and everybody still wonders, what is it? It's amazing. For years we've been talking about it, and yet there is a huge question mark, and it is actually hard to talk about it and hard to explain it. How much does this complexity, and if you want sort of some kind of wall that seems to be almost, I think sometimes there's something when you talk about quantum, it's like, yes, it's there, but. How much is that an obstacle in adoption, and is it an obstacle in usage of blockchains Bitcoin's alternative currency?
So
Thank you.
I think a blockchain is still quite young. I think he's about 10 years old now. And kind of like the Watson computer at IBM. I met him when he was a toddler. Now he's a teenager, and you know teenagers. And
You're
so,
scaring me.
and it's still actually evolving. So even for people who know blockchain, we'll say, so does it actually improve privacy? Oh, well, yes, it can. Okay, well, I don't know. So actually, is that good or bad? Well, the ransomware dudes, okay, so nobody can figure out who they are. So actually, how do you validate identity of people if you can't validate the identity of the idiot with ransomware? So I think there are things that are still being figured out. Some people are still talking in tongues about it, very honestly. So you went to Princeton, you're really smart. If they're not making sense, they're not making sense. That's something I learned as I got older. I thought it was me, but it's not. So use your little, beep, beep, beep meter. And a lot of it, I think, is still being figured out. But what we need to do is, jump in and try to make it better. I think the energy issue has to be fixed. I think if the mechanical engineers and computer scientists help, maybe if we all got together as a family, we could help a little bit. But there's more to be figured out on a lot of these issues. So one of the things that IEEE, as an example, is trying to do is also help create some test beds so we can try this stuff out, get some of the agencies involved, like the FDA or something like that. And I think what we have to do is be honest about where we really are and then make sure that we figure out the rest. It's not all figured out. Do you guys feel like it's all figured out, this Bitcoin blockchain thing, Basecoin, your coin, my coin? No, not yet. So you're right, it isn't all figured out. Is that a barrier to adoption? Well, that might be good if it's not figured out yet. It's like getting on a plane if you're not sure if it's going to fly yet. I was an aerospace engineer, not a good idea. So, so there is a lot to figure out yet, and that is a barrier to entry, but that's okay because we have to keep working it. So you're wise in your thinking.
I would just add to that the same way you don't need to know how an engine works to drive a car, you don't need to know how all of these details work to use Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. It's as easy as whipping out your phone, typing in your friend's name, and hitting send. You don't really need to know all about the cryptography and elliptic curve and hash function, none of that. So I think if you want to be a blockchain engineer, then yes, there's a high hurdle to overcome. But if you want to be a blockchain user, it's actually very simple.
But on that note, we should mention Professor Narayanan's course. Did you mention the Coursera course? So actually, Professor, is it Narayanan? Did I say that correctly? Yeah. So he couldn't make it. He had the flu, God bless him. But he actually has a Coursera course which is free. So if you want to learn about hashing, you can knock yourself out on that thing. And also, if you just Google Princeton blockchain classes, there's actually a series of video classes, including Ed Felton and Professor Narayanan and a few other folks. So you can learn all about hashing. And actually, right, the Bitcoin blockchain, all that stuff. And actually, Ed Felton starts one of, I started the first lecture and I said, okay, I know you just want to dive into Bitcoin, but first you have to eat your vegetables. We're going to learn about hashing. So you can go right to that course.
The one other thought I would add is in internet terms, we're in 1993. So, if you wanted to download a file in 1993, you had to know how to work FTP. And we're very much in that phase. So there's still a lot of user interface tools, a lot of middleware that still needs to be built out. The whole ecosystem is just really at its very early stages. Why don't we take somebody in the back, and I'll ask you to pick.
Hi, I'm Michael, class of 2021. I just wanted to ask Nader, what are your views on Tether and how Basecoin differs from that?
Yeah, great question. So for people who don't know, there's actually a pretty easy way to make a stable cryptocurrency, which is to keep a one-to-one reserve of dollars. And so what Tether is, he asked about something called Tether, which is widely used on exchanges today, is it's a cryptocurrency where there's an owner, and the owner says, if you give me $1, I will make you a Tether coin. And if you bring back the Tether coin, I will give you back your $1. He actually doesn't say that second part. but he says the first part. It still works, though. Tether is basically a cryptocurrency on top of a pot of dollars. What Basecoin is instead of being a cryptocurrency on top of a pot of dollars, really what it is an incentive mechanism that keeps the price stable. I didn't explain how Basecoin actually works, but at a high level, you can think of, actually maybe I'll explain it via the US economy today. So today, your dollar, when you use dollars, are not backed by anything. There's no pot of something else underneath your dollars. Your dollars have value due to a network effect, which is basically international trade, and an interest rate mechanism that the US Federal Reserve uses, a monetary policy, if you will. So, you know, if you want to be a global monetary system, the way that you scale to being that size is not by having a pot of something under you. You instead have incentives, and you have a network effect. And so Tether has a lot of usefulness in the short to medium term, where people want to use cryptocurrency. You know, maybe it has some benefits, right? It has like you can send something to someone in another country, and it's you know, basically worth $1. All they have to have is an internet connection, so it has that. But what it lacks is, you know, it has that owner, and the owner can run away with the dollars, modify the database, you know, which by the way is the major problem with Tether. People don't trust it, and really fundamentally the issue is you're not going to have you know, the Argentinian economy base itself on a pot of on a cryptocurrency that's on top of a pot of dollars. It really needs to be an ownerless monetary system where it's propped up by purely incentives. And so that's what Basecoin is. You know, it's trying to actually scale to be a global currency that's not owned by anyone, not corruptible, but still stable, and not unlike the monetary systems that we're familiar with today, dollar, euro. So,
Lauren, why don't you do another one in the back?
Okay, one. Hey, Festival 4. So I think a lot of people in the room are probably thinking that cryptos are maybe possibly a good investment opportunity, and I'm not sure if anyone up there can speak to the exchanges where these are traded. You know, we hear stories about people's wallets getting hacked. You know, we had HFT problems in real stock exchanges, dark pool, nefarious practices. If any of you guys could speak to that and kind of how confident we should be in parking your money in cryptos and whatnot.
Yeah. Listen, I think the quality varies widely. I think the hacking exposes the fact that not everyone has things as secure as they can be. It's a developing technology and a developing platform. And you know, it's very tough to even diligence things like that, is my impression, though that's a lay opinion. Maybe you have a different view.
Yeah, sorry, I keep saying the owner thing, and it's like when you have your coins on an exchange, it's in the control of an owner. Like basically the way exchanges work is, you send your bitcoins to them, and they have a giant pot of bitcoins, and then they have like a SQL database that's recording the ownership of the bitcoins. And they own that database. And if that database goes down, nobody knows who owns the bitcoins anymore. It's a complete disaster. So if you're using an exchange to store your cryptocurrency, you're adding the owner back in, and all the risks and issues that come with that. So I think general advice is don't keep a lot of cryptocurrency on an exchange. There are a lot of great solutions, like a ledger, which is a really cool kind of hardware thing. But you don't need that. You can have it on a piece of paper. You could even have it in your head. So I would not put my coins on an exchange, not for a long period of time.
Just to keep the questions going more fluidly, with the people with the microphones, just take turns handing it off to people rather than waiting for me.
Hi, my name is Chen Xin, a Princeton student parent. My question is for Nader. And when I receive a paycheck, government make a big cut. when I buy one item, I pay tax to government. So my question is, I'm actually worried how government could get any cut if all dollars become big Bitcoins, and could the government itself become a biggest enemy for Bitcoin?
Yeah, excellent question. I think people in the government are doing a lot of really good thinking about this issue. So I'll talk about Basecoin specifically, and then I'll talk more broadly. But for Basecoin, the market is not really the developed world. It's not really the US. It's not really the Eurozone. It's developing countries. Because, as I said earlier, in developing countries, a lot of them, the most stable currency they have access to is devaluing at a very high rate, like a rate of 10% or more per year. In developing country, it's not uncommon for people to live through multiple currencies in their lifetime. You'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, the old currency was bad, but the new currency is great. And that doesn't really make sense to us, but that's what the developed world is like. And that's what Basecoin is for. And if you look at the developing countries, especially Latin America, they really want a stable store value. And so they actually smuggle dollars. They take like 10,000 paper dollars in their jackets over the border, and they take a tremendous amount of risk in doing this because the government makes that illegal, local governments. And the sad thing is then they keep them and they put them under their mattress, but the police comes and takes them away anyway, right? And that's asset seizure. And so what Basecoin is solving for these developing countries is, think about their desire to have, all they want is accountability. They want stable value. So with Basecoin, they can take an infinite amount of a dollar equivalent over the border in their head, right? Literally in their head. You can remember a wallet code in your head. And when they have it in the developing country, it's not under their mattress. Nobody knows they even have it. And so nobody can take it away from them. And that's really, really important in the developing world. So if you think about what Basecoin is really doing, it's not really competing with the US dollar or the euro. It's basically extending the reach of the dollar into the developing world, making it so they can trade. And by the way, developing countries with bad local currencies are usually communists. They're usually dictatorships. And one of the best ways to topple a communist regime or a dictatorship is to introduce accountability via a good monetary system. So they'll trade more with the US. I think it's a pretty good story. Regarding taxation, that's another excellent point that's not only concerning for Basecoin, but for the space as a whole. And I think what you'll find is there's two classes of blockchain. There's public blockchain. So there's public ledger and anonymous ledger. So with Bitcoin, you can see all of the transactions that are happening. You don't know who the address is, but you know that he sent it from here to there. But there are anonymous blockchains like Zcash and Monero where you actually don't know who owns what, even though all the data is there for you to read. You can't. It's all encrypted, basically. So if it's a public ledger like Bitcoin, then taxation is not only easy, it's actually easier than in the existing system if you are smart about it. So in particular, if you make it so that the addresses that people get, if they go to an exchange, are associated with an identity, right? Then what you have is a public ledger where you know what everybody has, right? And you can actually tax it very, very easily. It's actually better, right? You can actually tax it programmatically even if you wanted. And if you look at the chairman of the SEC and the CFTC guys, they went to Congress and they were saying something really interesting, which was surprising to me, which they said, the public ledger actually makes it easier to regulate a lot of things because they can actually see what's going on. And so depending on if you go public or private, it's a completely different story. Now, the problem with public ledger is there's nothing to stop it from forking into a private ledger potentially in the future. And so it's possible that governments won't have a choice about whether or not people are transacting on a public or private ledger. But to the extent they can maybe make private disincentivize use of private ledgers or something like that, maybe that's their path forward. But if they can do that, and if they keep a public ledger, then taxation is actually quite easy.
So I have to apologize. We're over our time allocation. I know the panelists are going to be staying around, so feel free to buttonhole people with your individual questions. We're going to actually complete the night with Don announcing the winner of the Guess Bitcoin's Value competition. But before I do that, I do want to ask one final question to the entire panel, gazing into your crystal balls. So when we come back here in a year from now for the second annual Tiger Talk on blockchain, what do you think the most noteworthy change is going to be from where we are today?
If I may start.
Please.
I think the one thing that we're lacking right now is actually the application of blockchain. So everybody wants to trade it, everybody wants to invest into it, people want to bet on it. But when you think about the internet, you don't wake up in the morning, you don't go like, oh, I'm gonna go on the internet today, which one? You just think about, I'm gonna Google something, or I'm gonna follow my friends on Instagram or Facebook. But you think about actual applications. I think by this time next year, we'll be talking about specific applications, and blockchain will just be the system on which it's running. So that's what we're lacking right now. That's what hopefully will be there.
Great. Santiago, what do you think?
So my prediction is that this year we'll see at least one of the major exchanges fail. So I think hopefully there'll be some survivors. I don't know which one. I wish I did. So I would take Nader's advice to heart and buy on an exchange, but then put your funds on a blockchain. Keep control of your private keys. And my guess is that a year from now we'll still be talking about a lot of these issues, even though some scalability problem might have been solved, or maybe some proof of stake is out in Ethereum and it's working really well. As you said, this is like 1993. Next year will be like 1994 for the internet. Still a long way to go.
Okay.
So I think a year from now, the regulators are going to be more involved. I think they're trying to figure out how. I think there's a need for that, personally. If you're worried about all your money going away, I think you should think that might be a good thing if somebody was watching and keeping an eye on things. In healthcare, I think it's very important. Even if we have, I have a wallet with my medical records, I would like someone keeping an eye on all this stuff to make sure that bad things aren't happening. So I think that that's one of the changes we'll see, along with some bigger players participating. Because there's a lot of little cute stuff going on, like with all these new things, right? Like you guys do all this cute new little stuff. Well, you're at a big place. But, so I think there'll be some big players. Actually, someone just told me last week, and I Googled it, that Morgan Stanley's been using blockchain internally for 2 years now, right? Very interesting. So why would they do that? Well, it's like another layer of keeping track of what's going on, with the money, but they're also learning, aren't they? Right? So there are internal pilots going on, which is how we start things usually. Like we don't want to make a big splash if it's going to be a belly flop, right? So what you want to do is kind of, practice first in your little lap pool. And so there are companies doing that. So I think we may see some bigger players coming out. And I think the regulators are going to get involved. I know I'm trying to help them do that myself.
Yeah, so other than Basecoin being launched, I don't know. This is maybe off topic, but I think that I think the biggest change is going to be that venture capital financing is going to be seriously disrupted. I think that in the past, if you wanted to raise money, there are a handful of venture capital firms. There's actually a lot of them, but it's certainly less than the number of people in the world, and also usually you don't go to a venture capital firm in Europe, or in another country if you're trying to raise money. Usually stick to the U.S. And so what Ethereum, so as I said, it started with a money database, and now with ICOs, it's because we have now an ownerless equity database that's global. I think what it's enabled is the ability for projects to raise money from the entire world, right? Which was never possible before. Raise money from the entire world and keep in a way that still has accountability. Because when you raise the money, you give them a token that is fungible with yours as the implementer of whatever you're doing. And so there's some sense of accountability. Like if I hurt your token, I hurt my token. It's kind of a basic equity concept. But you can actually enforce it on the whole world, and there's liquidity now. And so I think For smaller projects, it's probably the case that the gatekeepers are probably going to be where they raise money. But for really hot projects in particular, I mean, you know, it's probably going to continue to be the case that you can snap your fingers and get Ethereum, you know, a bunch of Ethereum from the entire world, and the VCs are kind of like, whoa, what's going on? Hey, you know, I wanted you to add a board of directors, and you're like, oh, sorry, I got all this other money over here, you know, which is not a good thing. I think that'll change, but certainly I think that the gatekeepers are gonna at least see a slight erosion of their market power.
That's it. Thank you, everyone. And Don, who's our lucky winner?
So, as you know, we asked all the attendees to predict the price of Bitcoin as of today. I actually sort of looked at the price at 9 a.m. It was just over $9,900. By the way, the ranges of this audience were from $1,000 to $50,000. The analytically inclined would be really interested to know that the median was about 11.7. The average was about 10, but the closest to the pin was just $25 off of that closing price by a member of the class of 06, William Mongan, who I don't think made it here tonight, but we have a wonderful little prize for William. He'll just need to come down to PEC at Princeton to pick it up. I would like to thank the panelists, Nader and Florence, Santiago, Katya, and Dror. And on behalf of PEC and the Bendheim Center, a small gift in appreciation.
Oh, thank you.
It's always Princeton. I've always taken care of this.
Can we open it now, or?
You can open it any time you wish. Before we break, just a couple thoughts. I lost the last slide, but just some pending events, particularly for New York. I won't talk about the ones in the Bay Area or elsewhere, but our next Tiger Talks will be in May. It will be on AI and Google Brain, so a very fascinating set of discussions. The Alumni Entrepreneurs Fund, as I mentioned, has a deadline of April 1st. So if you're interested in that, please get going. And then on June 1, we have the Reunions Conference for everyone coming back to Princeton, an entrepreneurs conference and startup showcase. Also in Princeton on March 14th is the Innovation Forum. So if you happen to be coming down and really curious about early stage IP-based startups coming mostly out of the grad school and from faculty, join a really exciting session at the Innovation Center. Yes, Brad Smith on March 1 is coming to campus in the afternoon to give a very exciting talk as well around AI. So anyway, the bottom line is lots happening. Lots is happening here as well. The networking reception is officially open for the next hour or so. So please enjoy and network. Thank you very much.